Hi, I'm Peter Ellis, and along with my co-host, Sean Singleton, we chat with Jake Chapman and Tip Myers from Marque Ventures, a US firm backing early-stage founders building technology for national security. We dig into the reality of defence investing, how to navigate the 3-year plus pathway to getting a DoD contract, how to partner with primes and why this is helpful, and we also discuss how we can bridge the innovation gap between Australia and the US to get capability on target faster. Let's dive in. Welcome to the briefing room. Whether you're in defence, investing into the future, or simply curious about how great ideas become reality, this is your mission briefing. Let's get started. We're really keen to talk to as many different people in the ecosystem as possible because, as you are aware, our primary objective is to take our portfolio companies and assist them. The best way we can is to expand usually into the States and plug them into the right networks and connections that will progress their products and their companies faster. I'm really keen to understand what you do in your own firm, but also maybe able to share some insight into especially Australian founders, what sort of things that they can look out for when they're expanding to the States. So just, increasing our awareness and understanding on what's happening globally, what we can be doing.
Yeah, that sounds great. And the only thing I would just add to that is just, this is really important that the United States and Australia get this relationship right as it relates to the Indo-PACOM theater. And so if there are things that are happening on the great continent of Australia that should be in the U.S. and vice versa, we need to try to do as much as we possibly can between our two firms to make sure that it's a pretty easy conduit of capability that goes across the Pacific. And so, some of the questions that we'll ask you is how do we get past innovation theater to actually get effects on target? And would love your really candid feedback on some of the thoughts that we have. And I know, Jake, that you are a prolific writer on LinkedIn and various other mediums. So being able to sort of distill some of the commentary that you've had there into this conversation, I think would go a long way.
Do you want to kick it off, Jake?
So I'm the managing director of Marque Ventures. We're an early stage seed and Series A venture firm, but we invest really exclusively in companies working on technology that is relevant for national security. And so we say that we are not sector focused, we're industry focused. And what we mean by that is really we're looking for companies that are trying to serve a national security need and are most likely selling to the government. But that can really come in many different sectors. So certainly in communications technologies and IT and semiconductors and manufacturing, but it can also mean things that you immediately connect with defense, like aerospace and weapon systems and things like that. Marque grew out of an effort to revitalize what was called the Army Venture Capital Initiative, or the Army Venture Capital Corporation, which was created by Congress in the U.S. back in 2002. And it was created to be the twin organization or the sister to InQtel. So InQtel was created in 1999 to essentially be the in-house venture arm of the intelligence community. And then 3 years later, Congress said, we think that the Department of Defense has a similar set of challenges. We should give them a similar organization. But for a variety of reasons, Army Venture Capital didn't work out quite as well as InQtel did. And so it ran for about 10 years, sat fallow for 10, and then we had a chance to take it over and see what could be done with it. We spent 2 years working with the services and with folks up on Capitol Hill and essentially put together the plan for how you'd run a venture organization hand in hand with the Department of Defense, but realized at the end of that process that the better way to run that organization was probably as a private organization, given all of the kind of bureaucratic challenges that had faced it early in its history. But that is where I met Tip, and so I'll pass it over to Tip to introduce himself.
I have a much shorter story. So Jake and I met at Army DC. I was head of ops / plate spinner, and he was Grand Poobah who made sure everything actually happened. Finished out my time in the Marines as a company commander. I could have a greater impact more quickly by going into industry, and figuring it out from there. And so went and got my MBA from Wharton. I'm at Tech Front, and then armed to Army DC.
And just with regards to the Army Venture Capital arm, because I know the sort of sordid history there, can you share a little bit of how the Army got that so wrong and why they did not want to revitalize the brand as you were trying to lead them to do so? Just curious if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
You're poaching our book deal.
For 100 reasons, it didn't work out as well for the Army as it has for the IC. So, I'll start with one that we actually didn't highlight originally in our memo, but I think is fair. And that is what are you trying to get out of the organization? In-Q-Tel has a large staff and they do a lot of work that isn't investing. And so I think that the right way to view In-Q-Tel is not as a venture capital firm, but as an intelligence gathering operation. They write a lot of small checks into a lot of businesses and have a lot of analysts on staff that do a great job doing deep dives into the businesses and the technology behind the businesses. And then they provide that data back to government mission partners. And so I think if you ask folks in the intelligence community what In-Q-Tel does best or what they like most about the organization, they're probably not going to tell you, we loved that investment they made 7 years ago in GitHub, that return capital. Oh, how exciting for us. They're going to tell you, oh, what we love about them is that I get these quarterly reports or whatever they are from In-Q-Tel on things that I'm not thinking about or haven't seen. And so it's just a very different value proposition. Army Venture Capital, in contrast, over the first 14 years of its life, only invested in something like a dozen companies. Over the same period, In-Q-Tel probably invested in, I don't know, 600 companies or something like that.
Wow.
And so Army Venture Capital was operating much more like pure investment firm and not like an Intel organization at all, which is not to say that Army also it did a good job as an investment firm either, because it didn't. The investments didn't work out very well. Their most successful investment was bought by a Chinese private equity firm. And so that technology couldn't transition to the department. The fee structure was, I would say, bloated. The way they made decisions at the firm wasn't fast or decisive, and that was the way they set it up. Army didn't do a good job of sharing problem sets with the organization and helping them transition things. Congress didn't appropriate money in any sort of regular fashion. In-Q-Tel has benefited from very, very steady appropriations, very steady funding from the intelligence side of the house. Army did not have that. It was wildly different from year to year, including many years where there was $0 given. And so it's just different organization, was set up to do different things, didn't do them very well, didn't have the support it needed. Just a real disaster in a dozen different ways.
I think
Yeah.
foundationally, I think the answer is if you look at what In-Q-Tel, from the jump, In-Q-Tel was set up for success and it battling some pretty serious headwinds.
Yeah.
Whereas Army VC was not. So In-Q-Tel, Dr. Ruth David, Deputy Director S&T, said, hey, this is a real problem. I'm not seeing things. Very prescient, very ahead of her time. And then also had, she and her organization around her had the humility to reach out to the capital providers, to reach out to industry to say, how do we do this? How do we build this? They they have broader authorities. And so they're able to, it was just another transaction. DOD, I don't know if DOD could do that. I'm sure if you brought two JAGs in the room, you'd get 6 opinions. But they structured it very carefully. They handpicked the leadership they wanted. So they had the president, Norm Augustine, just a paragon of the American A&D industry. They handpicked their CEO, Gilman Louie, just a deep tech VC. And they defended them when first mover, what is this new thing? The systems integrators came, with pitchforks saying, hey, what is this thing? Are you trying to privatize our business? And the agency stood behind them and had the foresight to do so. And so just all of that structural setup for success was not there. Army VC was baby bird, get thrown out the nest. The Army didn't even expect it. They weren't even given a year to, hey, this is now authorized. It was just appropriated to. And so just structurally massive differences kind of show how it ended up.
Yeah. I've had the opportunity of knowing Gilman now for the past 15 plus years, and he gives a lot of inside baseball as why they were successful versus Army VC, right? And so in addition to having Norm Augustine, they had the Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, saying, hey, this is going to be a priority. And they actually had a 5-year business plan before the congressional authorizers and appropriators could come in and mess with their chili. And so if the government is going to go down this path ever again, having those types of structures in place will guarantee success a lot more than failure. So just one follow-up question on all of this. Obviously the Army has reconstituted itself in some way with Army Futures Command. What are your assessments as far as what they're doing currently? What could they be doing better? And what have they done well from your perspective? Just curious.
Tip, you want to go first?
We've been very impressed with how Sam Spitzer Pittman and Ariel Kane at Army Applications Lab and Dr. Casey Plow and the whole team, but those two in particular are the industry and venture facing folks, and they've been very forward leaning. They've been applying creative new applications of applying the tools that they have, which are mostly like cyber grant writing, some creative contracting, but it seems like cyber is their main weapon. They've done a great job of actually aiming those tools at commercialization. At actually, here, how do we field something? How do we fight tonight? Or, I mean, how do we fight within a couple of years? So I think that more recently we've seen a lot of good stuff at AAL, and we're excited to see more out of that team.
I think Secretary Bessent and the team that he has assembled over there, one person specifically, are very familiar with a lot of these lessons learned, and I think that they're trying to graft that in. And that's really relevant for this conversation when you actually look at the superannuation funds that Australia maintains. And they've actually brought those funds here to the States to sort of see if there's any way for them to get the institutional investors here to invest on their behalf in things that are very critical, not only to what Australia seeks to achieve, but also to achieve an investment return for the citizens there of the Commonwealth. So, but Peter, you were getting ready to say?
No, I was just going to sort of say that it's not dissimilar to other industries, even where we've seen here government looking at having internal innovation or funds or initiatives across the board, whether and same with large corporates, to be honest, whether they have do internal innovation or they take their problem sets and data sets and being open and sharing those externally, enabling people to come up with genuine solutions for them. It's not dissimilar to what problems that we've seen, models that have worked and haven't worked. It's usually the external operators that tend to do it much better simply because they just don't have the limitations. They move faster. They don't tend to have to do things the right way. They don't have as much fear involved in that process. And in regards to that in particular, what about founders and the people coming up with ideas in defence and the people that you're backing or who you're seeing? Are they also coming internally from defence? Are they veterans or are they coming from internal areas where they've identified problems and want to be able to solve them? Or are we looking at experienced operators externally utilising the tech and the skills that they have to apply to some of these defence problems? Where are you seeing the biggest increase or the biggest trends in ideas coming from?
I mean, it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Like there's definitely, I think it's definitely defense or national security is a buzzy space right now, or there's a bit of a bubble. And so that always brings new people into the mix that wouldn't otherwise be building in the space.
Yep.
So there's a fair amount of, recent grads out of business school or undergrads who have a great idea or they think they have a great idea, but they do have a cool tech and they're building that and they want to use it for national security or in defense of the West. And that's great and laudable. And we want more people doing that. And we want to be able to support those folks as best we can. This is a very niche space. And the thing that you think the government wants or needs is often not the thing that they want or need. And it's very hard to convince them otherwise, much harder than a traditional consumer or a business, where if you just build something of value and it's good enough, someone will buy it. They'll make just a rational decision and they can change their mind very quickly. It's not true in government. And so we also see a lot of founders who are veterans or former government civilians who acutely felt the problem, left, and then built a solution for it. I would say in this space more than in others, I bias towards the latter over the former. But that doesn't mean that the former can't build great solutions and still sell to government. It just means that they're working from outside building and they've got a hill to climb that veterans probably don't.
I think the shining star on the young side is comes to us courtesy of the esteemed Colonel Dr. Joe Felter and the Stanford Hacking for Defense course. I think they've done yeoman's work to get some of the most talented young minds attacking the problem, and we're always excited to see companies come out of there. I think we do generally see folks with experience coming out. On the growth side, or on the growth or go-to-market side, or capture, or whatever you want to call it, we see some very exciting folks coming out of the government saying, this is the exact problem I was trying to solve while I was in. I know everyone I need to be talking to. They whatever cooling off period they have or whatever, they make sure that they are ethically cleared, but they understand the problem deeply and where it needs to go. And then on the technical side, we run into, on the engineering product side, we run into just really talented engineers who either successfully exited the company or were at very impressive companies and said, hey, for my second act, I want to do something I think makes a difference. And, you know, there's no greater difference that you can make than in A&D.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. It's the US is very much multiple years in a advance from where we're at in Australia in this space, and we're seeing a combination of people coming from industry side and then also coming from, let's say, the tech side, or have the capability and they're applying it to a defense problem. What we probably don't see, and we don't have what you talked about, Tip, is the people on the university side. Yes, there is some exposure, but it's definitely not a level of what we would call excitement to be solving those problems, or anybody sharing the level of opportunity for those very talented technical young minds who would absolutely love, because they all want to be able to have an impact, get involved in something that's genuinely going to shift the dial, change the world, and look at the way we do things. So I think we've got definitely some big gaps there. We have a lot of funding that goes to research in Australian universities. So we are seeing a lot of research done, but probably not the commercialization side of making those things into commercial, viable ventures. So there's definitely a lot of work to do there, and it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds and what happens in terms of the focus and who gets involved. So and I think how it's worked in other areas outside of defense is it will be the success and the commerciality of various ventures and the publicity of that, the storytelling ability of that, which then flows on to the universities on thinking that they can get involved somewhere along the line. So I'm keen to understand a bit more about what you're actually investing in your firm, and what are you looking for, and where are you finding those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, before we move on to that, I think just to touch on what you were saying, I mean, part of the reason why defense is a bubbly space, right? I mean, part of the reason is just geopolitics, right? The world is sort of a basket case, and people see that, and so they want to do something about it. And the world is more of a basket case today, I think, than it's ever been in my lifetime. I mean, I was born in the 80s, so I got to grow up in the 90s, which was a time of like relative stability, certainly to the West. But you're right. I think people have seen here in the States Palantir, which has, I think it's a $200 billion market cap, something like that. Anduril is now $100.
This is what we need, right? I mean, we spruik Anduril and share videos and content because they are relevant founders that young people can connect to and see that it's a possibility to not come from that background, come from other backgrounds, and apply their skills to these bigger problems. So we love those poster children examples of what's possible.
Yeah. Like AUKUS started in Army Research Lab. Palmer started working on a DoD project. That's how his whole career began. It wasn't that he was a Silicon Valley tech bro, sold a company to Facebook, and then decided he wanted to build guns. I mean, his whole career has really been in defense, with a very short stint spent at Facebook. So yeah, goes back to the earlier conversation about it's a hard space to enter if you don't have any touch points in it.
Yeah, exactly. And so our primary aim is to create as many touch points as possible and make it easier through various connections and these kinds of relationships, so that we do have that level of open conversation and connectivity no matter where anyone is in the world, because we're all essentially trying to achieve the same thing.
Jake and I have had this conversation several times, right? Palmer, Peter Thiel, Joe Lonsdale, Elon, they're all a part of the PayPal mafia. And there's a finite number of billionaires that exist out there that can invest in this space. You all have a really great partnership with ManTech as a systems integrator. And my supposition has always been there's another viable path outside of having what I call an ablative billionaire backing you. And that's to actually go ahead and work with a ManTech, if you're a VC-backed company, to actually get on revenue as quickly as you possibly can. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then also segue into the deals that you're doing, because I think that there's a little bit of a ManTech component into your investment thesis too.
See, so a big part of our strategy is partnering with ManTech and being able to leverage their relationships and their government contracts to help companies that we're working with or looking at get to revenue quicker. I mean, if you are an early stage startup, you've never worked with the government, even if everything goes your way and you've built something that people want, it's probably a 3-year process to go from a thing someone wants to a real contract. There's milestones in there. You might get some grant funding in one way, shape, or form. Someone might nipper a little bit of money to you so that you can advance a prototype and do a demonstration event or something. But in terms of like real acquisitions, extremely fast would be like 3 years. One way to work around that is to work with a prime contractor who's already been awarded a contract to do X and Y. Usually they're not trying to do that themselves. So they're only trying to do a portion of that work. And so their role is to go out and find other people to team with to do that work. If we can bring ManTech a partner to team with, that partner can get revenue in year one to do that work and start building their product and interacting with customers and taking that feedback. So it's really a way to short circuit what is otherwise a very slow process. That's the goal. That's the dream.
That time
Thank you.
frame
Thank you.
is, sorry, Sean. Yeah, 3 years. And I think that's something that's, I know that people understand that it definitely takes longer, but I think there is a whole lot of, and that's where this is different from other sectors or innovative companies, is simply because of that process and the time and how long and what it takes for companies to actually survive that era, that period. And also, I could also probably say it's probably a bit longer coming from where we are, because we still have to go over into a whole new market as well. So it becomes quite complex.
One of the challenges in the space too is maybe not obvious from the outside, certainly not for folks who are just new to the space, is in most industries, the end user is the buyer. And so like maybe you're selling to someone in the IT department and they need to get approval from the CTO or something to buy the thing. But really it's the organization that's going to use the thing as the one that's making the buying decision, or the person who's going to use the thing. That's not true in the defense context. The end user doesn't have any money to buy anything or any authority to buy anything. All they can do is raise their hand and say, I like the thing. It'd be great if we could buy the thing. But someone else is managing the budget. Someone might be a third party who's managing the contract. Someone else is writing the requirements. And so like working in this space is really like being a conductor or a choreographer. You've got to get all of these people, a coalition. You got to build a coalition or a team. They all have to get on the same page, all want the same thing to make the thing happen. That's not really true, I think, anywhere else.
No, yeah, I'm so glad you explained it that way. Especially if when we often talk about getting things into the hands of the warfighter, and like you said, they're not the people making the decisions. They're not the person making the investment. However, we need them to think it's beneficial and the best thing and that solution to the problem that they're having, and to make their lives easier. Yeah. So the testing phase and the ability to be able to integrate the end user into that entire process with all of these other steps in the middle make it super difficult, which is completely different from other business models where normally you're working with the same person and you do that really early stage testing and iteration and product development. Whereas we've got so many layers to get through to even get to the end user in this industry.
Tip, what was the most significant purchase decision you got to make as a Marine?
Yeah, it is unfortunate that there's not more of a symbiotic balance between the acquisitions authorities and the operators. And that's, getting back to this bubble thing. The only way that we're able to prevent a bubble from actually bursting is to increase the amount of demand from the government side. So, getting back to some of the investments that you all are making, how are you looking to invest in these companies and sort of get the government to be a better customer through those mechanisms?
I have a weird, slightly controversial take on this, and Jake disagrees with me, but here we are. I think there is a bubble in valuation in a small handful of companies where the funding enthusiasm and valuations have outstripped actual traction. I think there's a lot of other places. Like,
you want to name
defense is
names?
too big. No.
Yes, no.
No, but I think the vast majority of other companies out there building stuff who have material revenue. We saw one company that had 100-something people. They had their own skiff, and they were raising at a fraction of what companies that don't even have a product yet are raising, also still in defense, for no reason to me that I can see other than just this is, no massive difference in overall market, no massive difference in, an incredible team on both sides. And so I don't know. I personally feel that there is a bubble in places. There are bubbles happening, but it's not one big bubble. How we think about, so the original question was how we think about supporting companies through that process. And it's just bit by bit, slowly, like figuring out where their gaps are You want your companies to understand that the warfighter has a need, that there needs to be a requirement, but there needs to be a Hill plan, and the Hill needs to know who they are, and authorization, appropriation. There needs to be a contract vehicle or a path to it. Most companies we run into know of all of those things. They're working on several of them. And so where we come in is understanding, where they are and trying to shore them up. And so if they've never worked with the Hill before, we try and introduce them to a lobbyist they can work with. We try and help make sure they understand the landscape and where they should even begin. If they don't know the contract vehicle side, we introduce them to ManTech and see if there's a there. If there isn't a there, we look outside and see what's available. But just really seeing where they're at and then trying to help them advance in the other pillars. That's it.
Yeah, so you're really coming in with the helpful part first, as in how can you best help these organizations before you're looking to invest in them? Is this part of your own, scouting or due diligence process? Is it looking at who can do this and where they're best placed and what the potential of that organization is to expand and grow?
Well, the good thing for us, because we're humans and humans are lazy, is that like our diligence process is also the same process you would use to figure out what we would need to do to support the businesses. And so it serves double duty, right? Like we are trying to take your technology, which we think is interesting, otherwise we wouldn't be talking with you. What are all the hurdles you have to cross or jump over before you're a successful business? Let's catalog those hurdles. And then if it seems like surmountable and a business we're excited about, a team we're excited working with, we've just done the work, right? We've just figured out what the hurdles are. So like, what are the things we can help you jump over now? And what are the things we can't? There's plenty of stuff that we can't do and the founders have to do themselves. When we're pitching the funds to other LPs, I tell folks, of all the things we look at, like the one thing I'm not helping you with is product market fit or warfighter fit. Like you've got to build something somebody else wants. I can't help you with that, right? But I might be able to help you get in touch with the right member of Congress or in touch with the right PEO or the right research organization who can get you a grant to get you to the next phase. But yeah, you got to build something somebody wants. That's always that's on the founder.
Exactly. And when you're talking about cataloging the hurdles that they need to get over, what are the most common ones? For example, you're seeing a lot of opportunities. Are there some standouts, repeat type of hurdles that you're seeing a lot of companies facing the similar things, or is it really unique and different depending on what it is that they're building?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, there are some that every company in a certain category will face that are big, right? So if you're building software for the government, you have to run on a government system or you need to use government data, you will need an ATO, and that is a huge pain in the butt, and that's a hurdle that they're all going to face. So ATO stands for Authority to Operate, and it's essentially the system administrator. I think it's the system administrator for whatever system you want to run on. The department has to give you their stamp of approval and say, we're willing to let you run on our system. And it's a cybersecurity sort of process. There are a million things wrong with that process, not the least of which is it's very slow and very expensive. But also, one system administrator's decision doesn't apply to the system administrator next to them. And so if you sell to the Air Force and then you want to sell to the Army the exact same piece of software, it's a different ATO process and a different approval person. And that's also true, I think, within the service. So you could sell to one group in the Air Force, but then if you want to sell to a different group, it's a different ATO you need. And that doesn't make any sense for anybody. So there are things that should be fixed. There are things, so that's software. If you're building hardware, you don't have to worry about ATO, but you do have to worry about how do I, get 20 or $30 million together to build something at scale well before the government is buying something at scale. And so that's fundraising advice. It is advice around non-dilutive grant funding. It's being creative with your capital structure. So some of it should be equity, some of it might be debt, right? There's like lots of solutions to cobble together there, but very different problem sets than the problem sets that like software focused folks are facing.
Classification is another one. If you want to build anything for space, if you want to build many things for cyber, you go to the government customer and you say, hey, what do you like? I build this form of rocket. What do you need? And they ask, hey, are you cleared? And you say, no, not yet. I'm a private company. We're just building technology. And then they just kind of stare at you and nod. And everyone's name is Jim and they have no last names. And they're like, oh yeah, we want to see rockets. And you're like, okay, yes, like, hello, I'm a rocket company. Here's what we build. Is this helpful to you? And they just kind of stare at you. And so that's a real chicken and egg problem where access classified information, you need to be able to access classified problems. But in order to be able to see classified stuff, you need to know. And so there's a gnarly chicken and egg there.
So what's the best way to
Organization.
get through that process rather than sitting staring at each other and knowing you've got a solution, but no one's really going to give you the information to help flesh the solution or the product out that's going to fix this? Who's best to do the first move, or who pushes hardest? How do you get past that?
If you wear a trench coat and a fedora to your first meeting, they automatically assume you're cleared. You just go from there.
Okay.
No.
And with a little bit of your eyes.
I'll make sure I
Yeah.
make a note of
Yes.
that.
Yeah. In-Q-Tel work programs are one of the great lights into space where they see something, they see potential of this works for my customer's problem set. They go find, hello company, are you being discovered? Do you want to go in a work program and do some mysterious things in a black box you won't see? And once you do enough of that, it's a path to a bit of revenue, not a ton, but it is ultimately, hopefully, a path to, hey, look, I am company, I am doing this thing. Agency comes to you and says, we like what you're building. We can get you a firm, a clearance, FCL. Let's work from there. That's the big standout. Apart from that, it's tough if you don't have cleared people.
Yeah, right. So would you say that's a standout offering of In-Q-Tel, that they actually work at that stage and that level to assist in that process?
I imagine
So
that's
does DIU.
a huge structural.
Yeah, so does DIU. It really depends. And what DIU tries to do is obfuscate the classification of many of the priority problems that they bring. And what they'll say is that once you've gotten to a certain stage within the solicitation response process, they'll read you in and give you the proper tickets that you need. But they've tried to get past this hurdle because, as Tip and Jacob pointed out, this is one of those goat ropes that, we really need to get past in order for us to get effects on target as far as the capability that, the DoD and the IC really need.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you'll read a problem statement and you'll be like, I wonder why the department wants someone who can do X. But then if you sit there and you think about it a lot, you think they probably don't want something that does X, but X is an analog to Y, and there is like a clear warfighting reason for Y. So if a company can do X, it can definitely do Y. You publish the request for people to do X, and then you get people to submit their technologies, right? So you have to look through a little bit. I will say DARPA is also doing interesting work in this space. A friend of ours, Dr. Greg Cooperman, who's a PM over there, started a program called Bridges, and that is a program designed to take early stage companies, put them on a contract that they can then use to sponsor their security clearances. And it's around specific problem set areas. And I think they've targeted generally problem set areas where most of the work being done is classified, right? So there are some areas where almost everything that's interesting is classified. And so if you think sort of the most cutting edge of aerospace, it's probably true there. But certainly in cyber, definitely in offensive cyber, all classified. A lot of interesting stuff in space classified. So people building in those areas, it's a bigger challenge for them than folks who are building, enterprise software solutions to make acquisitions a little bit more efficient, or name your other sector.
We applied to be one of the DARPA partners, so we are looking forward to whatever opportunity may come that way, because in terms of everything that seems to be what they're doing, what's coming out of there, like you said, is serving and meeting the needs of this entire process. So however we can get involved from the other side of the world and potentially work with some of those organizations would be amazing.
Is there an Australian analog to DARPA, or what is that group on the continent?
It's the Australian Strategic Capabilities Agency, AUKUS, says that they're one part Strategic Capabilities Office, one part DIU, one part DARPA. That's the way Professor Emily Hilder articulated their value proposition when she was there, right? I don't know if that's still the moniker now that they have new leadership at ASCA, that they actually advertise themselves as being that. But
hey, problem solved. Let's all go home.
Yeah, there you go. But look, there's lots more work to be done in the space, and there can always be more players. And we've highlighted a lot of the problems, we've highlighted a lot of the barriers, we've highlighted a lot of the sticking points. What makes companies win in this space? What have you seen that has either someone's been able to fast track the process, or it's been less challenging? They've had all of their hurdles sorted out in a quicker process, or what does it take to actually win in this space?
Yes, to Sean's point, if you have infinite money, you can build a defense company.
Okay.
No, but I mean the serious answer is the companies we've seen succeed aren't like they're making very thoughtful, deliberate bites of the apple. They're going after very specific addressable markets that they understand. Like this is a real problem that needs to be solved and the customer desperately needs it. And there's already a requirement and Congress knows it exists. So like, there's a lot of groundwork on things like that where we just have a capability gap. And those companies, the companies we've seen that succeed, start with one problem that is just they know very well, attack that, win that market, and then expand from there. The companies we don't want to see are the companies that we're skeptical of, just conceptually, are the ones that say we are going to be the next Anduril. No, you're not. The next Anduril is going to be someone who started with one particular, let's call it command and control tool, or one particular communications methodology, or one particular weapon system, and then just grew and grew and grew organically, carefully, thoughtfully from there.
Yeah, makes sense.
I agree with it. The only thing I'd add is this is true of any business. Like you need to skate to where the puck is moving and not where the puck is, right? So take the Wayne Gretzky quote. And like a reasonable example of that would be, in this year or last year, we've seen a ton of companies pitching, interesting small UAS companies whose main use case is probably in Ukraine. But, that theater isn't going to be at war for forever. And the market size there is ultimately limited, even if the war drags on longer than we'd all like it to. You got to think about what's the biggest concern for folks right now and what's relevant in that theater. And it's not Ukraine.
Yeah. With space, how many of your portfolio companies or investment, attention is focused on space?
How about you, Peter? What are you all paying attention to?
Oh, I mean, space is definitely on the radar, and it's just a matter of, people being bold enough to look at those problems to be able to come up with solutions to them, right? So they have to have had a level of exposure to an opportunity or one of those problems to be able to work on it in general. We will be looking at anything that will increase our ability to, or, increase our lethality and survivability as a nation, and what products will now enable us to do that. So it can come in so many different forms. And at the moment, it's a matter of for us being in as many places as we possibly can to listen to, meet potential founders who are coming up with solutions or are looking to grow or scale if they've already got something in market, and then navigate the next steps, which is taking them straight to the States, is where we lean heavily on Sean and friends like yourselves to help them with that market transition, because the market's very small here for them to look at the Australian Department of Defence's customers. But there's lots of, we're still such in that early stage where we need more stories. We need more people doing things. We need people talking about what they're doing to encourage those who are capable and interested to get involved. Like we said, we've got Australia is an amazing resource of very smart people. We have great technology companies coming out of here. Yes, we're a lot smaller, but are those people working on these problems that in a sector, because it's just not something it's not a typical event conversation yet. So we're aiming to bring that to the table, talk about it more, so people start getting more involved in that. We've had a lot of focus from the government and each state by state organisation focusing on general tech from 10 years or 15 years ago, building out the innovation startup ecosystem. None of it has been focused on defence. Space has come into it because it's exciting. But what is the real application of that? What does that actually look like? How do we actually develop those products? What's required? Manufacturing is not strong here. We need to build up our own sovereign capability in the manufacturing space to be able to build the things that we need to take to market. So there's quite a few steps involved in getting those ideas up and running. We're keen to get involved at any point of that journey, and we're keen to talk to any founders who are interested or doing things that have that potential to scale. So yeah, to be honest, it's a really exciting time. There's so many opportunities and really smart people working on things. We're seeing a lot of founders from other sectors who have had success now moving into defense, which is exactly what we want to see. and bringing that level of business experience and have executed before, applying what they know to this sector, and obviously plugging into the domain knowledge of those people from defence, from whatever area is that they're operating in. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting things going on. Did you want to add anything to that, Sean? Yeah, thanks. It's like, Steve Baxter, our founder, someone quoted it once, I think it might have been a LinkedIn post, that once he gets his mind fixed on something, there's absolutely no way you're going to change it. So that works in our favor, and it's very much to our advantage in this instance, because he's hell-bent on finding the next opportunity, those organizations that are going to change the game and increase our capability in this space, which we are as a nation falling behind and nowhere where we need to be, especially with the world looking like it's looking at the moment. And really, we're a little tiny island off to the side, and we really need to increase our sovereign capability. So we'll do anything that we can to do that. It's having conversations with good people like yourselves, but also it's like, how can we help the founders? How can we help them share the knowledge? Because we're still in this early stage of put as much information as we possibly can. We have to be planting seeds everywhere. We are at the grassroots level. Yes, there's people doing great things and we can help them scale. Great. But we need 10x that. We need 50x that volume of activity for it to have any real impact. So we're planting all the seeds. We're sharing the information. We're introducing them because the whole concept of how it works in the States in terms of looking at all the different organizations that you need to get approvals from, the more we share this information, the more people know what they're in for and they know how to prepare. And, those who are capable and willing will take on that challenge. But it's not going to be a shock. It's not going to be a surprise. And they're not going to end too soon, because if we can get that information out as much as we can across all the different channels, then those still hungry, still capable and willing will chase down that opportunity. And we will be there to help them if they want the help, of course, and of course the dollars. And look, to be honest, if finding investors, LPs to come on board is the narrative around defence is getting better, but there has been a resistance to that, because what does that mean? What are we investing in? So that's why the bringing the transparency to the conversation, understanding what the impact it can have and how big the industry is and how big the opportunity is, will help us recruit and get more people involved to help back these companies.
Is the reluctance a misunderstanding of the industry from an investment and returns perspective, or is it from the ESG perspective?
Mostly ESG. I don't think it's not to do with returns. It's definitely to do with, the public perception. It challenges people's values. And also the lack of it, defense is a big banner. It's a big banner. There's so many multiple parts within that. And if you don't know, and you're not from the sector, you don't often know what solutions are required and how these problems might be solved and what products need to go to market to be able to do that. So it's not just, and we have a focus on lethality in our branding and our marketing and our positioning, and that can be quite confronting for some people. So moving through that, and it's the future of defence for us is, as we all know, it isn't about handing out guns to young soldiers going to war anymore. We're dealing with really, really different things, and we need to be able to change that narrative and highlight what that actually looks like.
The example I like to use is, the way we look at ethics in defense, and I think this is a super important conversation, is that you can't look at the thing itself, the product or the technology. You have to look at the intent behind its use. Like the people who are building it and who they're going to sell it to, what do they want to use it for? And the example I like to use is SM-6 missiles, right? So the last, 100 SM-6 missiles the U.S. has fired have been fired in the Red Sea, and they were used to take down drones and other missiles that were fired at civilian shipping and civilian targets in cities in Israel. So we don't know how many lives those missiles saved, but they definitely saved, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of lives as a defensive mechanism. Those same missiles can be used to, shoot bunkers and land hits and all sorts of things. So it's how you use it.
Exactly.
The flip side is, look at Temu. Temu is just an e-commerce app, right? It went from zero to being a $60 billion business in the US in like a 2-year span, highly subsidized by the Chinese Communist Party. And it has put untold numbers of small businesses in the US out of business, drove them into bankruptcy, because it's just this like flood of cheap mass produced goods coming out of China. Is that ethical? Like, it certainly doesn't any ESG provisions, but I would argue that that's a direct attack on people's way of lives, and it's a weapon. It's just not the sort of thing you think of as a weapon. So you just have to look at how things are getting used.
Yeah, I think, and the angle that you come at it from. So yes, it can be a confronting topic, but as I always like to explain it is, in the event something was happening, everyone always expect someone's coming from somewhere to help them save them. They don't want to think about what that looks like. They don't want to be involved in the process. They just have a level of expectation. Someone is coming to help us or save us. They don't understand what it takes to build that entire ecosystem to be ready for whatever form that needs to happen in. Yet the expectation is, and the trust is, that the nation, the defense force at some level will protect them. Yet they have a lot of opinions around what that looks like in the process. So it's a tricky one to navigate.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you both for your time. It was so nice chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having the
Thank you all
conversation.
for your time.